Hi, Fred, sitting on top of the world. So I was just going to send you the link. I got your message just as I logged on.
I
But
wasn't sure that the one you gave before works every time.
yeah, it does. That's a permanent link.
Okay,
So,
great.
well, I wasn't sure when we first began. I wasn't sure how to do this either. Hold on just one moment.
Sure, take your time.
And happy Transfiguration.
Oh, thank you very much. You too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it here in Redondo Beach, California, it is overcast and about 75. How is it in Boston?
Here, I think it's trying to push 80
Uh-huh.
and sunny for a change.
Oh, good.
So
Good.
we
Here
had
comes-
awful rain yesterday
Uh-huh.
all day. Kept the kids from their athletic events.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, rain is something that I think is we're not having it. We're not getting it. I don't know when we ever will.
I
It's
wish
dry and
John.
hot.
Yeah. You're dry and hot out there, John, right?
That's a fact.
Are you back home or
I am back home, yes.
yeah,
That's
it's still
my favorite painting up there behind me.
right?
That's the crocus, which a dear friend of mine painted as a gift. The first flowers that come up through the snow in the
Oh,
springtime.
excellent.
Hi, Ned.
Excellent. Hi, Ned.
Hi, everybody. Fred, John.
Hi. And
Who's
George just called, George Crook called about 20 minutes ago from Cambria.
Mhm.
And so he's going to join us, but hopefully he's in a place that has good reception.
Oh, yeah, it's really hard up there. It's a very bad
And
reception.
what's the news on George Farrick today?
That I don't know, but George just came in. Actually, the internet in Cambria, it all depends where you are. If you're in a hotel, it can be good. If you're in a house that has good internet, it can be very speedy. And here is George.
Hello.
That's the finger.
Look at those suspenders that Fred is wearing.
Yeah, and he's sitting on top of the world too.
Nice background. Well chosen.
Betty keeps telling me I should wear suspenders because no belt quite seems to do it, when it comes to holding up one's pants at this age.
You reach a certain age where men's waistline is somewhat redefined.
Somewhat, is it?
That was one word.
Yeah,
mine was redefined downward.
yeah, yeah.
My old pants won't stay up if I don't put the suspenders on.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've found that trying to do that cuts off circulation, and hip problems came from that.
Mm.
From belts, John, or suspenders?
From wearing a belt too tight to try to keep the pants up.
Oh,
Well,
Yeah.
then the buckle cuts into one too.
Yes, yes.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, what are we gonna
Well,
do?
we're really starting on a line of guy talk here.
Well,
But-
Gender specific, huh?
And so far, my radiation is relatively side effects free.
Good, good.
A little
Good.
variation in bowel movements and urinary frequency and that sort of thing. which I won't go into any detail. I'll spare you the details, but it's a very minor variation.
Oh,
That's
good.
about it. And I've got, I'm well over the halfway point.
Fantastic.
We'll
Nice.
continue praying for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I feel them.
Fred, how about you and this pacemaker?
The new pacemaker has helped me quite a bit. And I'm working on being able to keep my balance and being able to walk far enough distances so that I can go back to school. I'm getting up there.
Hmm.
So things are going well.
Good to hear.
All my reports from the doctors, there's a team of them, are very good. So
George Farrick
yes.
just entered the room.
hey,
That's good to
He'll
hear.
be here in a moment.
thank you for asking.
Yeah, well, we've been praying for you too.
Yes.
Fred, what occasioned all this hardware?
I
Hello,
about
George.
in 1918 I had severe heart failure, and they did a lot of plumbing work through my leg up to my heart, replacing a valve and putting in stents.
Hmm.
Then about a year ago, I started having heart failure again. And it had to do with the pumping in my heart was insufficient.
Mhm.
So it was causing fluid buildup in I already have COPD, but it exacerbated that.
Uh-huh.
And so I started, they started with me again. And after switching medicines and so forth, they really decided that I needed a pacemaker to synchronize the heartbeat on both chambers.
So there had not been a pacemaker before.
Huh?
There had not been a pacemaker before.
No, this was a replacement. So I had a
Replacement.
pacemaker put in 2018. And they thought it wasn't, that one side of the heart was beating asynchronically. So they put this new one in with the thing into the other side, with the wire into the other side. And that has.
Now the melody is right.
Harmony.
Yes. And so.
Hi, George.
And the
There.
beat goes on.
And the beat goes on. Well, that's reassuring. Isn't it?
Well, welcome back, George Farrick.
Yes.
We've missed you.
Yeah, me too. I missed you, but I listened to your engaging conversation. How you
God bless
talked
you.
about your dad and machine profession and
Business.
so forth. It was very
Yes.
interesting. Yeah.
That was
And
fascinating.
your Ukrainian grandmother, Fred.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
wasn't alone.
What's that?
We had another Ukrainian connection
Ah.
with Tom.
That's right.
Yeah,
And also,
kind
A little different, but
But
Yeah.
mine was,
sufficient.
well, German Russians, they called themselves. They,
yeah.
they were in the Ukraine when that was simply part of Russia. Nobody,
Yeah.
in fact, I think it's the Little Russian Symphony of Tchaikovsky was named because he had several Ukrainian folk tunes in it.
Oh,
Yeah.
And that was, it was Little Russia at that time. Excuse me one moment.
George, well, he's on a break. How is Cambria?
Oh, gosh. I like it a lot. I had fallen in love with Cayucos down the road about 10 miles. And we've gone there repeatedly. But the people that own the house we love to stay at have sold it. And there are very few places to rent now in Cayucos, really. And so through the intercession of Ned, I think, and this paralegal that used to work for him, we're staying at her family's place up here. And Cambria is a lot more civilized than Cayucos. I mean, they actually have restaurants and paved streets and stuff like that.
Blackberry.
Not quite as close to the to the ocean and so forth, but so I've resisted it for years, but I'm really gung-ho. I think I would prefer this to Cayucos now. I sent Ned a text yesterday. I saw the Windhover. There's this place that, George, that you and I were talking about, Fescalini Ranch,
Right.
which is, Tom will be familiar with it. John, you are or aren't, I don't know. No, and Fred, I guess you probably go to Cape Cod or something for such outings, right? But it's like a meadow, clifftop meadow, I would describe it as. And so yesterday I went for a walk there about 5:30, and it was very windy, and there was this hawk. Might have been a turkey hawk or a buzzard hawk, but I chose to view it as a hawk. I mean, from certain angles, it certainly was. And it just hovered in the air because I don't know if it was because it was doing it deliberately or if it couldn't help it because of the strength of the wind. But it just floated, and it was, maybe 50 feet off the ground. And it just stayed there, permanent and stationary in the air. So it was like, oh my Lord, it was quite something to see. And so when I got back to the car, I got on my cell phone and quickly typed in the Windhover. It was afternoon's minion, but it was the same effect as Hopkins describes. That bird that, I guess a kestrel hawk is what he was seeing. And apparently they're like helicopters. They just stop on a dime and hover in the air. So it gave me a new appreciation of a poem I've always liked. And so that was yesterday's. But can I
think,
share?
George, he was checking you out?
Yeah, probably,
For a potential
Oh,
meal?
for prey? I thought you meant it was the morning's dolphin, Christ our Lord, who was checking me out to make sure I was behaving well or something.
Well, that could be too.
In case the rest of you aren't aware, my baby sister Mary is a member of the Cayucos community. She married Greg Betancourt, whose family owned the sporting goods store and the dive shop there 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And so Mary and Greg live 2 blocks up from the ocean. Their 2 sons live there and are married and have families. So Cayucos is very special in our family.
Well, I've been to Cambria a couple of times. It's very interesting because we stayed at right in the downtown part of the East Village, the old village. Because there's 2 distinct villages with the Catholic Church kind of in between.
Right.
And the first day I was there, I asked a waitress at Lynn's restaurant, do you pronounce it Cambria or Cambria? And she said, it depends on what part of the town you're in.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
She said that the East Village people, who tend to be the older ones from the, how would I say, from the tradition of the earlier settlers and so on, and they're a little more rustic and all of that, that they say Cambria. But the West Village, which is the somewhat more modern and somewhat more, maybe a little more snooty, they say Cambria. So that was her take on it anyway.
Lynn's is a
My-
great place to have breakfast. I like that place. Have you
What's the
been?
name of it?
I'm sorry?
What is the name of it?
Oh, Lynn's.
Yeah,
Lynn's,
we've
L-I-
just been hanging out here in this
Yeah.
house, really. Betty cooks and, you know, we have my daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter with us. It's a cool place, Nativity.
Oh, I think it's magical. I really do.
Yeah.
think it's magical.
Yeah.
It's like a little forest village. I mean, there are all
Yeah.
kinds of pine trees and deer wander the streets.
Yeah, have you seen the 5, 6, 7, 8 times deer and
Mhm.
turkeys, wild turkeys all
Yeah.
over the place?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it reminds me of Switzerland. You know, the way that houses are built on the hills there
Mhm.
on the west side. Yeah, when you go in.
Oh, I can't. So just put it aside. You serve me a plate and put it aside.
Can I share briefly something with you guys? I'm reading a book called The Plague Year by, what's his name? Robert Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, who wrote The Looming Tower about Al-Qaeda and the attack on September 11th. And it's about the plague, you know, our recent plague. Hang on, I'm just getting it.
In the meantime, can I
Yeah.
tell everybody, I've been reading this book by Sohrab Ahmari, biography, From Fire by Water, My Journey to the Catholic Faith.
Mhm.
It's a small little book, but quite good. He's the same guy that wrote The Unbroken Thread. He calls it the wisdom of tradition in an age of chaos. Anyway, go ahead, George, sorry.
Well, I think I've read a few of his essays. He's pretty good, except he's an integrationist. What do we call it? Integralist.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, we just need to take over the state and force people to be virtuous, right?
Well, he was a Muslim
Yeah.
from Iran.
He hasn't read enough St. Augustine.
Right. Okay, so here's this book. And needless to say, now this will shock you guys, but Trump doesn't come out well in it.
Heresy.
Yeah, but the authors, you know, trying to trace down the origins of the virus in this one chapter. So he goes back to Wuhan, and lo and behold, there was this doctor in Wuhan who, Dr. Li Wenliang, who died of COVID, but he was also the guy who publicized it first and got in severe trouble with the Communist Party for informing people that there was human-to-human transmission. And in fact, they made him sign a confession that wasn't true. And he died. Anyway, so when he died, so subsequently, his wife gives birth to their child, with Dr. Li having died. And she posts this on WeChat, whatever that is. My husband, can you see us from heaven? You have given me your final gift today. I will definitely take care of him well. And the guy goes on and Dr. Lee has a page on Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, there are millions of postings on it from Chinese citizens. And their messages such as this: "Good morning, Dr. Lee. I've got an English exam tomorrow. I hope I get full marks. Hey, Lee, the weather's nice today in Wuhan. I'm sorry, spring is here. Dr. Lee, my boyfriend just broke up with me. Now my future is so uncertain. Morning, Dr. Lee. I was taking a taxi home yesterday. The driver talked about you with me with his voice trembling. You're very missed here." And so on. You know, there was a downpour here yesterday. Dr. Lee, your ash is collected by Wuhan people, by people from all over the nation. Now, these people are atheists. You know, China, nobody supposedly believes in an afterlife. Yeah, congratulations, Dr. Lee. I hope the baby will grow up to be a good man, just like his dad. So right then ends that passage, and I'm skipping a lot of them. One cannot escape the sense that the messages to Dr. Lee are a form of prayer. What? You know?
Well, just because the government is officially atheist does not mean that the people are uniformly militant atheists. I would suspect that there's a lot of maybe animism and folk religiosity in the people's consciousness, as well as whatever vestigial Christianity may have come around, or
Well, there's Confucianism and
Confucianism.
Buddhism and all manner of beliefs and traditions
Yeah.
there
well,
that may
in
be
fact,
underground.
it's the western part of China where vestiges of Nestorianism remained for, I don't know, possibly into our own day.
Could
And
you remind me what that is, Tom?
well, Nestorianism was the quote heresy of that Christ was dualistic. In other words,
Oh,
divinity and humanity were sort of side by side,
uh-huh.
rather than integrated in any way.
Interesting, today is the Feast of the Transfiguration.
Transfiguration, yeah.
Wasn't it in response to Nestorianism that we declared Mary to be the Theotokos?
I think
Am
so.
I right?
I think so.
Yeah.
But you know, they were pretty much. I don't know. I think there were one or two emperors who were Nestorians, but the ones that came after who were Orthodox, you know, drove them out. My sense of the history there is generalized, but not too particular. But I think one group of them did go to what is now Eastern or Western China, and sort of thrived there in some kind of isolation, and were, you know, I don't know. I think I'd have to go back to do a little more research on that. In fact, I I think I'm right now going to look at Wikipedia and see Chinese Nestorian.
You know, those passages reminded me of what Near wrote in his book. He was never particularly into Mariolatry or Mariology or whatever the appropriate term would be. In his more traditionally Catholic days. And when he and his wife were in Portugal, he had no desire to go to Fatima whatsoever, but did anyway, and was just blown away at the devotion there evidenced. And, you know, he attributed it to the, I don't know, the human longing for the earth mother or something. Something akin, that's not what he said, but it was, you know, some sort of Jungian-ish interpretation. But I mean, Gary was saying something to this effect: you can't get away from some stuff, you know.
Mhm.
As human beings, it's always going to be there. And I wonder if these missives to Dr. Lee are part of that, you know, fully appreciating the Confucian thing and all that. But I mean, what makes these people think they could send an email or whatever to some dead doctor about their boyfriend, you know?
I had a student a couple of years ago who told me that she was so happy when she got accepted. She told her father how happy she was, and he was really happy too. And he told her, go into the bedroom and tell your grandfather, which she did. So,
Wow.
Wow.
but about Nestorianism, there were two models leading up to Chalcedon. The first one was from Alexandria, and it used the model of logos, the word, and sarx. And the way it understood it, Christ, was that in Christ, the logos took the place of the human soul. And so their readings of scripture tended to say that things like the account in the Garden of Gethsemane was really just for the sake of because of the way they thought about Christ. But the other model, which was the Nestorian one, used the relationship of the logos to anthropos, or to the human being. But he had no way of figuring out how the two were related, because he really wasn't a philosopher. And that was a problem, but it was good for scriptural interpretation because it really took the humanity of Christ seriously. The way it talked about the connection between the logos and the anthropos was a union of wills, which wasn't sufficient for. So you have the Alexandrians battling against the Nestorians for not taking the divinity seriously, and vice versa. And that's what led to the Council of Chalcedon, which talked about one person and two natures in Christ. Just a little theological background.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what I do in my classes, answer questions which nobody asked.
Can I ask, while Fred was talking, did any of you have problems with the sound?
No,
No,
not on
no,
my
okay.
end.
Well, I did, and I got a notice that my internet connection is unstable. And since you guys depend on my internet connection to a certain extent, at least, I'm going to, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm going to try to bounce over to another one of the networks from the FiOS here and see. Hopefully it'll just maintain. Yeah, there was, it went to the other network and it's okay. So, hopefully we're okay.
Hopefully so.
And the signal looks stronger.
Good, good.
George Ferrick, could I ask you, you mentioned Buddhism, I think, and Confucianism. I don't know anything at all about either of those, and I'm wondering. I've been often told, not often, but I've been told that Buddhists don't believe in God. Is that true?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think in general, I think that's true, but in common practice, rituals, they have a lot of, yeah, it's not a big concept. Yeah, I don't hear God coming up in talks given by Buddhist teachers and so forth. They're talking more about going within and such. But yeah, it's not like there is a being God that is central to Buddhism. Yeah. For example, the Dalai Lama said, "My religion is kindness."
But
So
that's-
he'd be kind of a, what do you call it? The beatitudinal Christian rather than a dogmatic believing Christian. But certainly it seems like the spirit of, they do have a sense of oneness and connectedness.
Yeah, that's big time, isn't it?
Yeah, they do have that. Yeah.
my
What do you
Buddhist,
think, Fred?
excuse me,
Yeah.
my Buddhist colleague puts a lot of the kindness. Also, he speaks of a great deal of, in terms of compassion.
Mhm.
And the more you succeed in the interiority, in their sense, it seems to me, from what George has told me, the more self-transcendent you'll be. And from a Christian point of view, at least in terms of the teaching about the universality and unconditional character of God's love for everyone, we should suppose that we believe that on account of Christ, the Spirit is sent to everyone in humanity.
Mhm.
So we're not going to quibble too much about. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't know how to do that. We're not going to quibble too much about the way they think about it. The interesting thing for me was that one of my colleagues, when he was doing his doctoral dissertation on Rahner, he was working with the Buddhist man who's a Jewish Buddhist, and he compared Rahner to Buddhist character, and he became very interested in Buddhism. And we had another colleague whose main interest was Hinduism. And as you know, in Hinduism has a way of thinking about redemption that's not unlike the wrong way that we think about redemption in legalistic terms. And so they have karma. And karma, you have some control over your karma. So that if you're a sucker or a bad person, what goes around comes around because of karma. So you better keep your nose clean, so to speak. So the Buddha was a reincarnation of I don't know what. And he came from the Hindu tradition, which is much older than Buddhism. And Matt told me, yeah, the only way I could think about the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism was like Hinduism would be the Old Testament and Buddhism would be the New Testament,
Right, yeah.
because you don't have that karmic burden, but you have a different way of having to think about these things. But George knows much more about these things than I do.
Yeah, just a couple things in line with what you said, Fred, about the inner experience. Yeah, Buddhism might not have a dogma, they're not so much into dogma as a direct experience. So when you read about the monks and so forth, they really spend a lot of time meditating and going to what Lonergan would call the interiority, right? Well, the same thing with Meister Eckhart and a lot of the Christian mystics, the same thing. Even St. Thomas Aquinas, didn't he say something like at the end of his life, he looked at his books and he said, this is all straw, kind of like all the concepts kind of fall away and so forth. And so
in the face of the crucifix and resurrection.
Yes.
yeah,
Lonergan
there's
makes a distinction between belief and faith. So belief is holding as true on the basis of the credibility of God in the case of believing in dogma. What you couldn't know by just your human resources because it's transcendent. But Lonergan calls faith the eyes of being in love with God. And that comes with the gift of conversion, which we should suppose that holy Buddhists are converted, and they're participating in the light of that tradition, in the gift of the Spirit. And in a certain sense, that readiness to be compassionate and kind, that's pretty much what we mean by charity. And so it's really not a big conflict between us. And what is more true is, like George has done, who has sailed. Have you swum the river?
yeah, the Ganges. I swam the Ganges.
Yes.
But I took a good shower afterwards.
I hope so.
But what would be true is your knowledge of Buddhism and your practice, in some sense, of what you've learned makes you a better Christian, I think. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there have been a tradition of a number of Jesuits. Do you know Anthony de Mello, Fred?
Yes.
Yeah, who unfortunately died of a heart attack at an early age. It's sad, but he was from India, but he studied under a Buddhist, an Indian who was a meditation master, and that influenced the way that he saw the Ignatian exercises. He kind of combined them. And there's a book here called Zen in the Bible by a Jesuit called Katawaki, who died a few years ago. And he called it Zen Nation exercises. He combined his prior study of Zen before he became a Jesuit with the Ignatian exercises. And then there's B. Griffiths, who was in India and lived with Hindu spiritual people and so forth. So there's been a lot of crossover. And I even thought I came up with the Lonergan connection in Buddhism in France somewhere. I have to go and see if I could find that. But yeah, they're really into, the Buddhist masters have a real presence. If I look at Jesus, it seemed like he had a presence to whomever he was with. Whether it was a woman reaching out and touching the hem of his garment, and he said, who's that? And it seemed like he had a presence to the Samaritan woman, and to the tax collector, the lepers, a presence that was remarkable. And so a lot of these Buddhists are like really present to you when you're with them. And that's kind of a result of their practice, trying to be directly in the here and now. And the gospel saying, if you lose yourself, you shall find yourself. That's very akin to the Buddhist thing of, losing your sense of self-identity as an individual, but seeing yourself as more connected, kind of like the mystical body experience, where you'd be connected with your identity is no longer you're not in a silo, you're not an amoeba cut off from other beings, but you're connected, kind of super connected. So yeah, so there's a lot. I find it very complimentary, and that it's
I want to, while you're on the Jesuit theme, George, how about Cautino and his book, How Big Is Your God? Is that one familiar? He too is from India, Jesuit from India.
I'm not familiar with that one. Yeah.
It is spectacular. I taught from that for quite a few years.
How do you spell it?
Coutinho, I think it is. And his book is called How Big Is Your God? And it overlays perfectly, George Farrick, with what you're saying about that culture and that sense of spiritual connection.
Yeah, one thing that, in line with what Fred, you were saying, that he was like the Old Testament and New Testament, or he was Hindu, but he went beyond it. The Buddha broke out of the caste system. He did away in his own teachings with the caste system, which was predominant and is still there. But he totally obliterated that, and he saw everyone as equal. And that was part of his path, because he came from a high class and he broke out of that.
Yeah,
So he went through a similar experience. Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah. And you might say if Jesus in his human consciousness, somehow he broke out of the thing too, right? Don't you think, Fred, during his life, he, at first he said, well, who am I? I came to minister, but Jesus, just give me the crumbs from the table, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And when,
I think what you're bringing out is before orthodoxy and dogmas, answering further questions about Jesus and the Trinity. There was orthopraxis and pre-dogmatic Jesus. And
right.
There's a certain sense in which that's what people who are serious about the spiritual life go back to. People who are serious about the spiritual life, they realize they need a spiritual director. And the spiritual director makes so much, is so important to their life, their lives. And we know that from the experience of George and Ned with Herbert. And that was a turning point in their whole orientation, it sounds like.
Yes, sir.
And the combination of the way the person lived and acted, plus what they had to say about how to live and act. It's just an amazing thing, a lovely thing.
Herbert, incidentally, was a great fan of DeMello, George. But I have a question, George. I wonder, we all, I think, when we look at Buddhism through our, at least in my case, very ignorant eyes, I see their efforts to become detached, from their emotions and all the things that generate conflict within people, anger, etc. And the compassion is legendary. You know, I don't think anybody would say of the Dalai Lama, oh, he's not a virtuous man, you know, even though he's not a Christian. I mean, but now here's a question I'm kind of struggling with. I think ultimately in Buddhism, you become, I guess, an old soul. No, that's Hinduism. But you reach nirvana, right, George, if you're successful at your practice? Am I right?
Yeah, I don't hear a lot about that, but yeah, I don't hear that word nirvana much. They do talk about enlightenment and awareness. But yeah, I don't hear a lot of that struggling about nirvana. That might be equivalent to a Christian person who says, well, my whole purpose is to get to heaven, you know, and it seems like orthopraxis comes in and that people say, well, the way to, you know, don't think about getting to heaven, think about what you want to do here and now
Yeah.
to be a heavenly person or a heaven-bound person, right? Kind of the shift of the focus, because that sounds like an egotistical thing, right? So I think it's more to really go within and discover. Nirvana is not an already out there thing, Fred, as you would, you know, it's not a thing that you would, but it's going within and experiencing through a bodily sense too, of breathing, of how we operate, how we think. I did a paper that I presented at Loyola on Lonergan, Tarthan Tulku, and Gregory Bateson in terms of self-appropriation and going within and just experiencing, like, where do thoughts come from? Like if you sat there, Ned, let's say, and a thought came up, where did it bubble up from?
Mhm.
You know, and you say, well, who am I? You know, who am I really? And where are these thoughts coming from and what do they mean? And you let them go, and then another thought comes up, but we're kind of in a drama, you know, all of us, we're the director, the scriptwriter, and the actor, right? And in a certain sense in our drama.
And the
even
audience.
yeah, that's right.
And at different times, all parts.
Yeah, and I think Fred, you might elucidate that too, but you know, Lonergan says when you start to constitute, you know, the study of the subject begins to constitute himself or whatever by the choices that are made. So we're doing that, but a lot of us aren't even aware of that. You know, that we're in a drama and that we're interpreting and the writer of the script, and to kind of get behind that or just observe it, become an observer of the drama and an observer of the self.
Well, what you said about thoughts coming unbidden,
Yes.
it's also true about questions and insights.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You probably won't have an insight unless you have a question. But you can't make yourself have an insight or a question. So like what teachers do, it's a kind of way of wasting time. I'm guilty of it. Is you ask the class, do you have any questions? And you know, they furrow their brows and don't say anything because they don't have a question. Hasn't occurred to them. You haven't elicited that. But I think on that, what you were saying, George, about nirvana and so forth, that the whole point is a displacement from oneself as the center of the universe to what is the center of the universe. And I'm always reminded of one of the Boston College's alumni magazines, which had a survey of whether people went regularly to Mass or not. And they always asked as well whether they did or didn't. Why don't you go? And the ones who didn't go said, I don't get anything out of it. And the ones who did go all said, I get a lot out of it. Well, worship really isn't all about getting a lot out of it. And so that problem of displacement away from oneself as the center of the universe isn't solved by attending or not attending Mass, either way. Not that I think it's a neutral matter, but.
Well, I have an impression, and it's founded pretty much on ignorance, I concede.
Like all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but that in Buddhism, George, ultimately, you so let go of yourself, in theory, in hope. And then, as Fred said, you're free to encounter something greater than yourself. But in Buddhism, there's no there. You just ultimately wind up annihilated. And you're better off. It's for a good
Kind of.
purpose.
no, kind of not really, because
Uh,
I think that would be kind of akin to a Gnostic heresy, because you do have to go out, even Buddhists that would be doing that, go out with their begging bowl, right? So they are a self, there's a sense in which you can go beyond yourself by still realizing, gee, I've got this self. You become very aware of selfhood when you go up to buy a ticket and they say, sorry, we just ran out. The person in front of me got the last ticket and I didn't. So so I can rejoice in the fact that this guy's going to the concert and I'm not, or this person is getting that flight and I'm not. But yeah, but you observe it and you know that it's not ultimate. You know that we need ourself in this world, and if a Buddhist says, well, I'm just going to go out and walk in front of a bus, that's a misuse of the sense of self. The same way somebody might say, well, I don't need to go to the doctor because God loves me and he's going to protect me and I don't need to do anything. Or Steve Jobs, who decided to use some alternative medicine and kind of regretted it when his cancer came back because he refused certain types of medical treatment. So there's different levels of reality. And I think the thing is, be appropriate, don't let the physical and material take over the spiritual. Don't let the spiritual neglect, each layer subsumes the other layers. We're biological, we're chemical, and then we're conscious, and then you can go up, go up the layers.
Emergent probability.
What's that?
Emergent probability.
Right. Yeah.
There it is.
So, so I think that would be a misrepresentation, George, of that you just annihilate yourself. I think you do go to the point where you realize that the self you think you are may be an illusion, like somebody that says, I've made my own life, instead of realizing that it was their ancestors and the school they went to and blah, 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 et
The
cetera.
mentors that came our way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even Fred, you're, the doctor that put your defibrillator in is part of you now, right?
Right.
Yeah,
In
we're not.
In many ways,
Yeah.
because actually the team that's taking care of me, they're my friends. They're part of my constitutive meaning.
Yeah.
And that's the way they think of it too.
Yeah.
Not just technicians coming in and putting different things in and out of you.
But they're part of your life now, right? I mean, they've enabled you to live,
Absolutely.
right? So, yeah.
And I love them actually.
Yeah. So that's what I think. Maybe you could say, George, that Buddhism is an appreciation of self rather than a aggrandizement of self, kind of self in its proper place. But there's another self, a true self, you might say.
Well,
Aristotle says you can't be a friend to someone else if you're not a friend to yourself. And being a friend to yourself is having rightly ordered self-love. And rightly, you're talking, everything you're saying, George, has to do with have a rightly ordered self-love. That's the way I take it.
Right, yeah,
Does that sound true?
yeah,
well, but I'm not talking about, when I said annihilation, I didn't mean from ascetical practices or detachment or something like that. I meant when all is said and done and you die,
right,
in Buddhism, there's no absolute for you to be in communion with, or to merge with, or to be subsumed in, or is there? And does it matter?
yeah, well, I think, well, here's what to me, Christianity adds to the mix is a personal sense of a God, rather than just consciousness, that I go back into the big ocean of consciousness. I could say, well, I'm a little drop that kind of spurted up and that's my identity. And now I go back into this big ocean. You can hear people talk about that. So to me, it's a lot different if there's some kind of personal.
Yeah, whereas in Christianity, you live forever as an adopted member of the Trinity, a brother of Christ. It seems to me we're adopted into the very life of the Trinity with the second person of the Trinity. If I understand Galatians right, Fred, no, yes, maybe, sort of, not even close.
No, what you're saying is true.
Well, a Christian in theory.
Love is really God is one.
Yes.
God, but we believe that God is also three persons, one nature, three persons. And so the gift for Christians of God's love, the way we consider it, and we're happy to be able to name it the way you are, George, is that it's a team project. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Father sends the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and Jesus sends the Holy Spirit to everyone. So but first, the Father sends the Spirit too. So the Father sends both, and the Spirit enters into us. And if you have the Spirit, then you also have what you just said. You have Christ in you too. You have the Father in you too. They're not separable, but they are personal. So you can pray to each of them as we do in the Our Father and in prayers to Jesus and so forth.
Well,
There's an analogy that's dancing. I have to say, dancing around in my mind, and it has to do with a black hole. We know that black holes, for example, there is a black hole at the center of our galaxy in which all the stars, everything in the galaxy is rotating, moving around. That's at the center. Yet our inclination here, we've sort of gone from this world being the center of the universe to no, it's the sun that's the center of the universe, to no, it's a galaxy that's the center of the galaxy that's center of the universe. And now the universe is so vast that we have absolutely no idea where the center is, except that it started as a singularity, which could be like a massive black hole that exploded and suddenly became outward for whatever reason, outward. And, we can talk about God's work there and whatever. But what I'm thinking about is that we know that everything in our galaxy is rotating around that black hole and may eventually.
Tom, you're wrong. Like,
The
gone. I
Lost
can't
your
hear you.
voice.
Can't hear you, Tom.
Well, oh dear.
Tom,
Tom,
we can't hear you.
can't hear you.
I'm sorry, that's probably the network fault.
Now you're
Oh,
back.
there you are. You're back.
Am I back? Okay.
Yes.
We didn't hear a thing about what you just said, your point.
It's
to
a
the black
connection
holes.
problem. Let me see if I can go back. And
Okay,
Please.
raise your hand and go like this if you can't, at any point where you can't hear me, and I'll shut up and you guys start talking again. Because I think it's my connection that's causing the problem. Anyway, you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
yep, thumbs up.
So all that we can see is the boundary of that black hole. But we know that it has massive gravitation that sucks everything into it. And it seems like, oh my God, if that's the center, that's horrible. But by the same token, we have no idea what is going on inside of that black hole. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We have no idea what really is going on inside of that black hole, and there's no way that we can know, except that, it's there. And in some ways, we can't let that annihilation into the black hole dominate our lives. We still have to live our lives with meaning and with other centeredness and so on and so forth. But ultimately, knowing that we're going to end up there. Now, what I think the Christian revelation is a little glimpse into that black hole, that there is something dynamic going on that is our ultimate destiny, that is good rather than fearsome. I'm not explaining it well, but
Well,
I'm
me-
dancing around.
Let
the
me
concept.
jump in
you're-
for a second.
You're not being
Tom.
chopped liver, Tom.
No, not at all. But I'd like to take your description a step further, because I love to reflect on what's on the other side, that what goes through the black hole, does it come into something above and beyond our perception of reality, which
Yeah.
to me transfers beautifully into my spiritual life.
Yeah.
And to my sense of faith, that above and beyond death is something above and beyond what I can
Yeah.
imagine.
But we cannot peer beyond that border naturally,
Yes,
by nature. We
Yes.
can only we can only catch glimpses through what we might call revelation, and centered, certainly for us, centered in Jesus Christ.
yes,
That is-
So is a metaphor of human birth helpful here? Let's say, when each of us was in the womb, if somebody tapped you on the fetus shoulder and say, hey, do you want to leave where you are now? And you're going to go out through this dark hole away from where you are. You'd probably say, no, I want to stay here. I'm comfy. I've got all the nourishment I want. I'm warm. But we do come out into this life that we didn't know anything about before, right? The infant comes out crying and screaming. So maybe there's something similar, John, what
Well,
you're saying.
Actually, that was Paul Spellman, Father Paul Spellman's funeral homily.
Was
He
it?
went to one of his funerals, he went to all of them.
Uh,
Oh, Johnny One Note.
Yep.
But Saint Augustine used a kind of similar image when he said God is like a circle whose center is the same as his circumference.
Mhm.
That kind of is getting at the same thing that you're expressing, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and my question, I'm taking it as a Christian given that the Spirit inspires us to call, to say Abba to
Yep.
the Father, you know?
Mhm.
And if we're calling the Father Abba, then we are sons and daughters. And who is the son and daughter of the son of the Father is Jesus, is the second person of the Trinity. So if he is Abba to us, then we, it seems to me, are incorporated, as it were. Leave out the as it were. It seems to me we are incorporated into the Trinity and hold down the place of sonship and daughterhood. And that's kind of cool. And it's, quote, definite, you know, don't know what it means, but it sure means something. And it seems to me, now I'm not denigrating Buddhism in saying this, but because I think Buddhists are sons and daughters of the Father. You know, I mean, salvation or cosmic fulfillment, let's call it, in eternity, comes to us through Jesus, whether we know it or not. If we're devout atheists and we can, you know, on Judgment Day, stand before God with our tattered copy of Nostra Aetate or whatever it was, and say, yeah, but I was a sincere atheist. I did the best I could. Well, okay, God is going to say, okay, George, you made it. You got across the finish line. How did I do that? I did that through the salvific action of Jesus, whether I knew it, whether I believed it or not. So I'm not excluding atheists from what I'm trying to say. All I'm asking, George, is in Buddhism, when conceptually, one winds, am I right? One winds up annihilated, merged into the absolute. Whereas I guess we're merged into the absolute in our thinking, but while preserving our identity. You know, I'm now living the life of the Trinity as a son, as a second person, but I'm also still George somehow. Whereas in Buddhism, I have the impression I wouldn't still be George. And that's success in Buddhism.
I think George Farrick is still George.
yeah, no, I think
No, I
that-
am.
No, I think if you were talking to the Dalai Lama, he'd say, yeah, I'm the Dalai Lama. You know, I don't think he'd say I'm nobody or I'm just like everybody else. Or I think the whole thing is that, you know, when you see Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama together laughing and so forth, you know, there's
I'm a fan.
what,
You know?
yeah. So what's annihilated is the specialness or the I am more than you, or I am, you know, as Fred said, the center. I'm not the center of the universe. I am a participant in it.
Well, the Dalai Lama would say today, I'm the Dalai Lama. But what does the Dalai Lama think he will say after he dies?
Well, he may end up saying, I've never experienced it before. In other words, Buddhists have been asked about the afterlife, and they say, well, I don't know. I haven't experienced it yet. I haven't experienced it yet. And I know a lot of Christians that would say the same thing. I don't know what it is. I haven't experienced it before. I have no idea. you know, and
The,
Well,
I think-
we,
George, I think a solution to this really comes up in Matthew 25, the center of it, the
Mhm.
story of the Last Judgment.
Mhm.
If you did it to me, or if you did it to anyone, you did it to me. And if you didn't do it to anyone, you didn't do it to me.
Right.
And I think all the holy people from these other religions are living that way.
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, for
Yeah.
example, in the New York Times, the last couple of days where it has the obituaries, maybe it was just, they had the Mother Teresa of Ethiopia. I don't know if any of you saw that. It was
No.
this woman from Ethiopia who started orphanages and ended up starting a nonprofit. She's just, they call her the mother, you know, and it's just, and so she's a person who, I don't know if she has any Christian belief or anything, but she's the equivalent doing the same thing as Mother Teresa. And it's kind of like what Fred, what you're saying, you know, she was doing those things, you know, to these children who didn't have anybody to take care of them. And she took them in and saw that they had a place to sleep and food and got a whole educational system started. And it's a marvelous story and a marvelous photo of her surrounded by these marvelous faces of these Ethiopian children. Just a beautiful scenario. So there's all kinds of people out there doing different types of things, you know.
Oh, I buy
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I know
totally
that.
buy
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just,
I'm just asking about Buddhist dogma, you know.
yeah, well, they don't go for a lot of, you know, the dogma is really different than I think what you're thinking about. They don't have the same type of, you know, they have teachings about how to get deeper into different layers of consciousness. That's probably the primary thing that I'd say about it. It's more of a how-to book rather than a book of proof texts, you know, about different things. Just like you might say that if you started meditating for many, many hours, you might begin to experience more of what you believe in dogma. You know what I mean?
Interesting
Yes.
you put it that way, George, because Terry Hershey, whom I read almost every day, has reminded me to go visit the movie The Two Popes, because the presentation of Francis and Benedict is spectacular. And has everybody watched it at least once? I'm ready to go
Yeah.
back and watch it again for exactly the reason of what you just said, George.
This is just a quick footnote. I thought they got Francis pretty accurately and Benedict not at all.
Oh.
Take on it. I don't know.
Maybe.
What do you think, Fred?
I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, okay.
I would tend to agree. Benedict was a little bit more a popular
Teutonic.
fantasy of Benedict.
What was that again?
Benedict was more presented as kind of the popular fantasy of Benedict. You know, I think Benedict was certainly a deeper character, but nonetheless, they did a great deal of I think very good characterizations of the interplay
Oh, it
and
was
actually
great.
the appreciation of the two.
Very well done.
Yeah.
I kind of like the premise of it, that, you know, Benedict was actually, you know, according to the premise of that movie, you know, was sort of wanted to groom
Francis. Oh, yeah.
Jorge Bergoglio as his successor. Which there may be a little truth to that. I don't know.
In the
Well-
United States, he might have been his vice president.
Yeah. Well, I personally think that Pius XII groomed Roncalli as his successor. Just from the assignments that Roncalli got under Pius XII's, you know,
You
domain
mean,
and tutelage, going from nuncio to Turkey to nuncio to France right after World War II. And then from there to the Patriarch of Venice, which at that time Milan and Venice were two stepping stones to the papacy. So
when Penny and I were in Venice, I was wandering the streets, and here came this priest from the Basilica in St. Mark's, whom we had seen say mass. And so he was picking up a prescription in the pharmacy, and I walked beside him and engaged him in conversation in a mixture kind of my pidgin Latin and Spanish and Italian, you know. And I remember saying, and he said he had been in residence at that basilica his whole priesthood. He was an old man. So I said, oh, how wonderful. You lived here when John the 23rd was Patriarch of Venice. Yeah. And you lived here when John Paul I was Patriarch of Venice. Yeah, the same house. Yeah, must have been wonderful, I said. He looked at me and said, not so much, or something like that.
Yeah.
It kind of cracked me up. He was not a qualified.
We've all had that not so much episode, right?
Well, that's not what he said, but I mean, whatever he said was,
Yeah.
that's what he meant.
you know, I still have to have to, you know, recall that one of the high points of any of the trips I made to Turkey, and there was only got to do it twice, I think, was to be able to visit the private quarters of Roncalli in Istanbul when he was the papal nuncio. And, you know, they turned it into a not very public museum with remnants of his relics of his time there. But it was just kind of marvelous to be in that space where Roncalli really was probably formed for his what he did as Pope.
Interesting. Did you see his library or books he may have read, or were they not there?
I don't think they were there.
Okay, yeah.
But I suspect whatever he read, he took with him,
Uh-huh.
especially the ones that he cherished. But
Yeah.
I have a story about Ratzinger from my former colleague, an English priest, who somehow or other he became very friendly with the Redemptorists in Rome. And he started off with them in Scotland and then became the same thing in Rome. And actually, Roncalli asked him, would you let me make you a bishop? I'm not Roncalli, but Ratzinger. So the story he told was one of the moral theologians from the Redemptorists was called in by the Holy Office, whatever they call it, the Congregation of the Faith. And before he was to go there for his, whatever it was, encounter, Ratzinger came to him and he told him, oh, this is what's going to happen. And as this happens, this is what you're going to answer. And at the end of the interview, the person asked, well, why did you come here to tell me these things? And Ratzinger said, well, there's someone on the group you're meeting who want to hurt you, but I'm not interested in hurting you. I just want you to change a couple of sentences. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But also it was the thing that when people wanted to, I know people at the Greg, when he was at the Holy Office, wanted to talk to him, students and so forth. And he very willingly had a big conversation with those people en masse, just a very open conversation. The then person who was sort of playing the role of John Allen
Mhm.
in Rome, I can't remember his name.
Predecessor of Crux.
Pardon?
Predecessor of Crux.
Oh, yes. Well, no, he was just a journalist. But he's the one who told us, but he was assigned by Newsweek to Rome. And he's the one that I saw this in his blog, I think. So he wasn't as uptight as people made him out to be. And I think he's holy and learned, but certainly had a different orientation than in certain ways than Francis. So you only get too many. You only get so many Gregory the Greats and John the 23rd.
So Tom, back to your visit to Roncalli's room. How do you think being in Turkey may have influenced him from your knowledge of Turkey or your visits there?
It gave him probably a far more universalist outlook as to, his love of the Turks was very well known and very public and demonstrated. In fact, the city of Istanbul changed the name of the street that the nunciature was on to Papa Roncalli Street.
How about
And
that?
they financed putting a statue of John the 23rd in front of the major tourist Catholic church in Istanbul, the St. Anthony's Church on the what is it called? No, I can't think of the name of the street, but it's a major tourist shopping area. And our tour guide would always take us there first. When we went to the church, he would take us there and say, this is the Turkish Pope. The people of Turkey still have a high veneration for Roncalli. Now, he was there during World War II. And in that position, he saved numerous Jews by, doing things like issuing fake baptismal certificates and that sort of thing.
So,
And taking them into places of safety.
So would you say then that he kind of was living the ecumenical encyclical that came out of Vatican II before he was living it with the Muslims in Turkey and the Jews and
Great
experiencing-
insight, George.
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
And the Orthodox churches too.
Yeah,
The Romanian
exactly.
Orthodox.
yeah.
Because he was he was nuncio to Turkey and Bulgaria.
Herbert, I remember asking Herbert, how could a guy who would prove to be this radical in the popular sense of the word, have survived all those years under Pius XII, who was busy shutting up Courtney Murray and Donnie Lou, what's his name, the French Jesuits. Anyway.
Maybe he was practicing Buddhist meditation.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, he was
Herbert
practicing Buddhist meditation all those years.
And how did he become so? Herbert's theory was he had taught at the seminary in his diocese for a while, but he taught church history. And therefore, wasn't perceived as sticking his head out of his foxhole particularly.
Yeah.
And then was exposed to all the things he was exposed to in his career.
Although there is a a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not. I think it may be true that there was an open file on him in the Vatican, possibly the Holy Office. I'm not sure. For suspicion of heresy, Roncalli, that is. And one of his first acts when he was elected Pope was to go and dig up that file and write on it, "Case closed," and put it back.
By popular acclamation.
Yes.
But no, you look back on his career, and I personally think Pius XII did a lot to pave the way for the Second Vatican Council, including
That's true. I agree.
I think was there are some of his writings where he anticipated the need for a council and had considered even calling a council, but then knew that he was too old and infirm to really be a part of it.
His homily on day one of the council, I think, is one of the great documents in Roman Catholic Church history.
Yeah.
Do you remember that, George?
No, I'd have to go back and,
Oh,
yeah, I wasn't over there then, and so yeah.
And we're going to start the council today. And there are all these naysayers who are across to me every day in the exercise of my Petrine ministry. And it's quite something. He really tore into his opponents. It's just an amazing homily.
Yeah.
So what supporters did he have? He just didn't do this alone. Do you have any idea, Fred, or who were his?
Sooners.
Yeah, I would think that he was in harmony with someone like Sunins, but I don't know myself. I do know that John Courtney Murray, after he died, Courtney Murray wrote an article about him in America, saying he brought the church from the classicism of his predecessors into a historically minded phase of the council. And certainly many of the conciliar documents confirm that.
There's you could find this online. I just happened to have reviewed it recently. There was I don't know how for sure how you say this in Italian, but something like Notte della Luna. Ctedellalluna. And if you look for that online, you can find on YouTube on the first night of I'd never heard this till a couple of years ago. On the first night of the council, something like 500,000 Romans marched down to the Vatican carrying candles and lanterns and so forth in the dark, and were under the papal window calling for John to come out, which he did, and gave this beautiful little homily and sent them home to give their children a kiss from the Pope.
Wow.
George, could you send a link to that homily?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, to all of us.
Yeah.
It's very beautiful.
George, the day is D-I in Italian.
Okay.
Everything else was right.
Okay, I'll find it. I think it would be all over YouTube, but it's not. It's kind of obscure. But I know it's there. But
We didn't have iPhones then to take pictures.
Right. But the optimism that John, I mean, gosh, what a guy. What a guy.
Well,
Yeah,
just the idea of moving from a doctrinal council to a pastoral council, what a sea change that was.
Yeah, yeah.
There was this cardinal from Sicily. I can't think of his name. And I remember when Father Roden was going to throw me out once, he said, Cardinal so-and-so wouldn't approve of you or something. And he was head of seminaries. And oh, shoot, it started with a P. His name came up once, Fred. We were, but he was one of John's supporters in calling the council, according to Wikipedia or something. I just looked him up recently. The cardinal, something piqued my curiosity. And then once that was in gear, opposed everything that John tried to do. Pizzardo?
I think that's right, Pizzardo.
Yeah, but certainly the French Jesuits would have supported John. What's the name of the French Jesuit, Fred, who was, I started reading a book by him once and I just dropped it. I haven't got back to it, called, it's an analysis of atheism. The Psychology of Atheism is the name of the book. It's not Donnie Lou, it's the other guy that ultimately was made a cardinal and rehabilitated. White hair.
De Lubac?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. What do you think of him?
Oh, I think he's the salt of the earth. He really is a great guy.
Henri Dalubac.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
he was
thought-
one of the leaders of the ressourcement that
Yes.
Tom was talking about last time.
I mean, imagine the faith those men had that when the Vatican of Pius XII came down on them so hard. Dubac, I think, Fred, I don't know, wasn't even allowed to teach anymore. And all his books had to be taken out of libraries. And like Tom's good buddy, Chardin.
That also happened to Chenu,
Who?
the Dominican named Chenu, Chenu, who was a live wire in relation to the worker priests, for example. Also, I always remember how much Lonergan preferred the French Dominicans to the English speaking Dominicans in the United States and England. And precisely because he was open in that other way. I have to send you a chapter from this book by Lonergan. Let me just see what the title was. Pope John's Intention. It's a wonderful. You guys will all resonate with it if I can get it scanned and sent to you.
Okay. Oh shoot, what was I gonna say? What the question I had about Lonergan. And still am behind in reviewing the materials, but I got about halfway, 2/3 of the way through the first chapter, finally.
Did you get to the questions at the end of the chapter?
No,
Brilliant. Okay.
but I never thought I was going to be able to understand the thought Lonergan had. And, but he struck me as starting from a completely Thomistic premises and with a Thomistic vocabulary, and kind of like wouldn't have scared anybody at the time. You know, I'm just here to enhance this stuff. I don't question it. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, I was distracted. Say it
Well,
again.
Lonergan, it seems to me, when he first started up, would have reassured dyed-in-the-wool Thomas about his orthodoxy and nothing to be afraid of here, folks. You know, I'm just building on Thomism and just taking it to the next step. Now that we've got more knowledge in the world and science than when Thomas was building on Aristotle.
Yes,
There's more to build on now.
that's true. But I think he he didn't get along with Thomists because
Oh, he did.
his understanding of Aquinas was very different. He wrote 2 books. His dissertation, which was republished under the title Grace and Freedom, and a later one that a research he did in relation to teaching the Trinity called Verbum, Word, and Idea in Aquinas. They first appeared in Articles in Theological Studies, the editor at the time those were published was John Courtney Murray. The Verbum Articles was the beginning of this kind of stuff you're going to learn from Miller as time goes on in that book. And what it has to do with is giving up perceptualism or thinking of knowledge on the analogy of ocular vision. And that goes together with what he calls naive realism, in which you think the really real is already out there now, and that's it. It's more or less the same as empiricism. But the big difference is that those Thomists also were conceptualists. And they believed that concepts arose not from answering questions consciously and formulating what you've understood, but they arose as impoverished replicas of what you saw already out there now. And because they were abstract, they were impoverished rather than sensible. And so more imaginary. So that was another issue. And Thomas totally disagreed with that. But all the Thomas texts that we'd been so-called Aristotelico, Thomistico, Thomism, were basically all wet on that issue. And the third thing that goes together with the other two is abstract deductivism. And what that means is that you think of knowing simply in terms of being logical. Being logical is something that you can do if you have clear and precise ideas. And they supposed, well, if I know what a word means, I have a clear and precise idea. But it's not the same as understanding what the reality is. And so I remember when I was first having philosophy, And I thought of, and we had, what was it called? Material logic, or the first part of logic, in which they,
Formal logic?
well, it's formal, but it had to do with the beginning of metaphysics. And they thought of they used examples of concepts as one word, like the word tree or the word dog, things you already know about. And you didn't need to think about, well, why do we call dogs dogs? And really a concept is the answer to a question that you have. And you get the answer to the question by getting insight into images. And you're asking what's necessary for this to be what it is, say a circle, and not something else. And when you come up with the answer finally, you start off with a hint. There have to be no bumps or dents on the outside. And you get to the point where you think, well, then if it has no bumps or dents, it has to be a point, a set of points, co-equal from a coplanar and co-equal from a central point. And when you say that, you have the definition of a circle, a set of terms and relations that mutually support each other. And concepts are that kind of thing in the explanatory order. So for example, my daughter, when she was a little girl, was, because she had an older brother, she learned to talk very quickly. And also she was already starting to be an artist, but she wasn't too far along. So she would come over to me with a pencil and a paper and say, draw me a circle. And if I drew a rectangle or an oval, she would have known that's not a circle. But she still doesn't know, probably even today, the strict definition of a circle. So what she means is she learned our language, and our language refers to things we can imagine and see, smell, taste, and touch. And we learned that by realizing, if you know what a circle is, you don't have to learn what everything that's circular is. You just have to know what a circle is. And that's the way our language works. Similars are understood similarly, and so they're named similarly in ordinary discourse. But there's another kind of question that wants to get beyond ordinary discourse to explanatory discourse. And that would be scientific or technical in some sense. But even, it goes back really to Socrates. Socrates, the early dialogues of Plato have Socrates asking people questions. Like he would ask someone in the military, what do you mean by bravery? And the person would say something like, well, you're brave if you don't run away from some danger. And Socrates would say something like, yeah, but that might be stupidity rather than bravery. And so on it would go. He'd keep eliminating these common sense answers by people. So a guy in the Euthyphro was a priest who therefore knew about piety, holiness. And so Socrates would say, well, you must, if you're taking your father to a trial for impiety, you must know what piety is. And of course, when he said, well, please tell me, I want to know what piety is. And of course, his answers were ridiculous. You might have that happen to priests today, but But at
Hey,
any,
Tom.
at any rate, he wanted a definition. And a definition means you're saying what a thing is in such a way that it defines every case of that thing and no case of anything else. So as we saw with the example of bravery, the guy knew what bravery was, the military person, but he didn't know how to define it in that way. And Socrates never knew either. He would come to the end of the trail and still not be able to define the thing omni et soli, every case of the thing and no case of anything else.
Mhm.
So Aristotle credits Socrates with discovering the what is it question. Quid sit? What is it?
Mhm.
Which is a version of why, how, on what principle, etc. So that's a different mode of discourse, what Socrates was aiming at. But he took apart, so to speak, ordinary language when people, in the Lysis, it's a wonderful dialogue about friendship. He meets a bunch of young people, many of whom he knows, and he knows are friendly with each other. And he asks them the question, well, what is friendship? And so they go through the usual things. Well, friendship is when, that usually is the way they talk about it. It's when two people like each other. And he says, well, that's not enough to just like each other. What else? And then other people would answer, well, when two people, if they're complete opposites, not just like each other. And the priest who was in my class, visiting the class, to be together with, on a sabbatical, to be together with kids he taught in high school. He told me after class, every time I do marriage instruction and I ask people why they want to marry this person, they either say, because she's completely like me, or she's completely the opposite of me. The same thing as those kids say, but it doesn't have much to do with what it really means to have the love of friendship. That, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about now, but it's just the Socratic dialogue. The dialogues are asking that what question, and so asking the question about, well, you have technical language in law, and that's partly why people hire lawyers. If they tell you their situation and what they need help with, and you set it in a context of the law, which you know inside and out, in order to contextualize their case for the court and to do the best you can for them, or whatever the issue might be. So you know technical language and discourse by your knowledge, your study of the law. We go through this all the time. And part of what becoming a lawyer would mean is to learn to understand what the law is in its technical form, and also to be able to see what the applications of those technical terms are, which you learn from case law and so forth and so on. And then you come up with rules of thumb from all the cases. You learn certain principles from the cases, or they're pointed out in your textbooks. So that's a different case of the same thing. You're moving from the context of ordinary experience into the context of the law and the courts. And it's a different form of understanding which people don't have. That's why Tocqueville said, and this was the old days, one of the ways that's really good about democracy is the law. Because when people come with their cases and their problems to the law, to the lawyer is able to put it in a context of the human good, in a context that the person with their individual problem doesn't necessarily understand well enough to see what the problem is in the face of the law. And how, even though they don't understand it, they may be right in what they want to plea or what they think is just for them, but they may not too. But no, nevertheless, whether you're defending a person who's guilty or defending a person who's innocent or firm or whatever it might be, you have to know. And in some sense, it's your duty to follow the ethical principles of being a lawyer, whichever thing you do.
Sure. Can I jump in for a minute? Because we may not have much more time left. The Feast of the Transfiguration raises for me the challenge of questioning how much was Jesus aware of his call from birth until Gethsemane and the cross? And did Lonergan's approach help or even address that progressive awareness, which totally fascinates me as a model for my spiritual journey?
Well, the Gospels have different ways of approaching the narrative.
Clearly.
So the Gospel of John's nothing like the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and so forth, Luke. And so, and the way that Paul talks about Jesus is completely different from those ways. So in the Gospel of John, you get a very divine Jesus. He knew what was in people's hearts. And so he left the crowd that was gonna do him in. And by contrast, the Gospel of Mark has a much more human Christ. So you have
This is a Checkers game where grandson.
pretty much what scripture scholars are saying is that probably Jesus's knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures was partial, but they're pretty sure he had an understanding of Deutero-Isaiah, the second Isaiah, and he had a growing appreciation of that's where he fit in. That's tended to be a lot of the ways that scripture scholars. Tom probably knows much more about this than I actually, but that would be a way. And the other thing that was emphasized is titles. And they have a significance. So, for example, when he says the Son of Man, we know he got that from Daniel 7:14 and so forth. And so you're putting together things from these different titles, but we don't really know what the ipsissima verba, as they used to call them, of Christ are. Because in a sense, the narratives of the Gospels are not historical, but they're theological interpretations of in relation to their situation of life and so forth, sits im Leben, that they're addressing, and also the framework from which they come. And so you have all these different kinds of scriptural studies. You had form criticism, you had Redaktionsgeschichte, the thing of going through all the different versions that, so for example, you have the Gospel of Mark. If you've ever used one of those New Testaments that have all the parallels of the different Gospels,
Yes.
and you see that both Matthew and Luke have added so much to Mark, which is the framework that they add to, and so forth and so on, but they put it in different places in their composition and so forth. So it's really a complex thing. And then when you get beyond, now an awful lot of scriptural interpretation is mainly thinking of it in terms of literature, literary criticism. And so you have these different schools that are mixed up in different ways. So we have a New Testament scholar that came to our department rather recently, and his introductory lesson, lecture was on what's called Q. Do you remember that?
Well,
Logion Quella, a hypothetical text that we've never ever seen or heard or anything. There's no particular evidence for it except in a way speculating what might be the origin of all these sayings of Jesus.
that's pretty much out of fashion. I don't know what to call it anymore. Is that true? Quelle is
You might wish so.
okay. I'm sorry.
Well, I was listening to that lecture. I hope so. But no, it's still discussed
Okay.
and not only generally, but in great detail, with people using tools and knowledge of all kinds of other things that I don't have knowledge of, since I'm not a scripture scholar. But so there is really evidence in the Bible, in the New Testament, that the evidence is really not historical, but it's a kind of record of the faith of the communities in which they're written. And so we either join up with that faith or not. And we have the benefit of putting all the different texts together, and then raising further questions. And many of the further questions have been answered later on in the conciliar, the way Nicaea and Chalcedon and so forth. But an awful lot of questions are still wide open. But they've been answered, but the answers are really only heuristic. In other words, they are answers which contextualize further questions. They're not closed. And so being a theologian is really quite a challenge. I didn't do a very good job of answering that question, but if you read Daniel, and if you read Isaiah chapters 40 to 55 or so, you get an idea of how Jesus could have thought of himself in Old Testament terms. And so we don't know. See, since being human, as we're going to talk about, and as we know from our experience, is so much a matter of mutual mediation of each other. We learn about each other from each other. And we don't know that much about all of his context and his upbringing. We can
You don't
suppose,
mind, did Lonergan speak with you about his journey with Jesus through his spiritual life?
oh, he was a very, very serious Jesuit, and therefore lived out of the Ignatian spiritual exercises, and did that very much in terms of meditating on what he called the mysteries of Christ, which are the stories that you get from the gospel.
Yep.
And you relate to that in terms of your own images and your own feelings. And as time goes on, you become wiser. It's the Christian version of the Buddhism. You're finding out how to discern the spirit in your life, your feelings of complacency and of happiness and so forth, and of dismay. And you're seeing what they're related to, both in your thinking about Jesus and the stories of the gospel, or in your thinking about your own life and in your thinking of your own life.
I wonder, would it be fair to say, because this is what's going through my mind right now, that as you gain wisdom, as your conceptual reality broadens to become more and more inclusive, the less you are capable of really adequately articulating that object that you are seeking. In other words, the more you explore a mystery, the less you can articulate it. The clearer it becomes to you, and the more real it becomes to you, the less power that you have to actually convey it in words that define, because the limits that definition means keep getting permeable, keep broadening. Would that be
Or that you can accurately share it.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense, Tom.
It sure is my experience.
Yeah.
In any field of knowing, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That humility and joy can live together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do know this, though. Lonergan had a person, a younger Jesuit, who did his doctorate under Rahner on the theology of the spiritual exercises, and he was his spiritual director. And he told me, his name was Harvey Egan, he's written on these matters.
Yeah.
And he told me that Lonergan was truly a holy person. He's not divulging any particulars, but he really said he's that way. And he, as an old timer, had a great devotion to the Mass and said Mass every day, but wouldn't have been together with others. But still, it was part of his spirituality. So that is a witness, at any rate, who I take very seriously, because he himself is a very good person.
It's 12:06. Should we call it a morning?
Yes. Okay.
Kind of
Want to
seems
set
to
a
me
goal for next week?
I'm pretty prepared to talk about the first 2 chapters
Oh, that's great.
and maybe have questions afterwards.
Bravo.
yeah. Why don't we make a pledge among ourselves to get kind of familiar with the first two chapters, with some kind of maybe making notes as to what our questions are. And then that should be able to launch us into wherever it goes. Because
Yeah.
it's very interesting how, and I think it was very enriching, our morning conversation today, but it went in all different directions, yet they all had sort of like the circle, they were all equidistant in a sense from the center.
Well, Tom,
Wonderful.
I'm back at the black hole.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to think a lot more about that because that was
Yeah.
just a concept of a metaphor, if you will,
Yeah,
that
right. Yeah,
that just occurred to me while we were talking.
yeah.
We'll see if it has any merit.
Okay.
Well, just let me thank you again for allowing me to share these times with you guys.
Well, thank you.
Well,
It's
thank
a
you for
blessing.
being part of it.
Oh,
Actually,
Thank
I want to say thank you to all of you. And we all probably can say thank you because it's only serendipity that has kind of brought us together.
Yeah, really.
And
Yeah.
I always find serendipity as another name for Providence.
Providence, exactly.
yes,
So,
the music, yes.
Ah.
Yeah.
Karma. I'll toss that word in
And-
there.
And
Karmic.
George Crook, in the last moment of our being together, has finally adjusted his camera.
Yeah.
So he's more
do
or
I.
less visible.
I'm trying. Was it like this the whole?
We could
Time?
only see half of your
Yeah,
face.
yeah.
Right.
Your nose on up was all we could see.
I'll be darned. It didn't show up that way to me. I mean, it showed up as a full port. Oh, I see, because I wasn't sitting close enough. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, enjoy Cambria, George.
Yeah.
I hope to. So far, so good.
How
Good.
much longer are you going to be there?
Only till Sunday,
Ah,
Okay.
alas.
You
only
can't
have
help but enjoy that place.
We only have to be green with envy till then.
Yeah.
right.
I wouldn't want to be the occasion of sin for Fred Lawrence, you know?
Uh-huh.
I think that's
Okay.
the least of my problems, that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm consoled.
So,
Ciao.
Love you all. God bless.
Bye, everybody.
push that little
Bye-bye.
red button.
Okay,
God bless
farewell.
you all.
Thanks, John, everybody.